In the next 3 lessons, we will be looking at how the ego fixation and passion of each type play an impact on sexual play and on sexual satisfaction. Now, I will be focusing very much on the ego fixation and on the passion. So it's not about virtue or holy ideas, so you should get yourself ready for quite some negative things. Because what I want to do in these 3 lessons is really focus on how we're actually self-sabotaging ourselves from having a truly fulfilling sexual experience. So it's important to understand that in these 3 lessons, I will be very much describing sexual behavior, sexual play at levels 5, 6, 7, if you are using the Riso-Hudson levels. Of course, people who are in higher levels are going to still show the same patterns, but maybe to a lesser extent. And also the differentiations between the different types will get less pronounced. Lesson 6 is all about the body type, so let's start with type 8, because that's probably the easiest to understand, and most likely this is going to be the shortest video of all 9 types. Actually, for type 8, sex is something pretty straightforward, and most 8s tend to be quite satisfied with their sex life. They don't consider it to be boring, basically because 8s tend to take what they want. 8s hate boredom, and this is definitely true in the bedroom. And they basically think that sex makes you happy, and if you're happy, then life becomes nicer and easier. So for type 8, sex is very often something very important, and 8s tend to believe that a couple cannot stay together if there is if sex doesn't work out. And they basically believe that without sex, there cannot be a loving relationship. So platonic love is definitely not something for an 8. 8s also have a hard time understanding why some people can actually put up with mediocre sex. And like one sexual 8 said, why get 70% if I can get 200%? Why would you want to live like that? Why would I put up with a partner if I only get 70%, whereas I know that I can easily get 100%? Another 8 said, well, taking sex away is taking oxygen away from me. Now, what happens is that if in the beginning of a relationship, sex is not really working out, most likely the 8 is just going to disappear from the relationship. They're just going to say that they don't want to deal with it like that way. But if it is further on in the relationship, if there is already a strong emotional bond, most likely the 8 is just going to be disappointed, is going to be unhappy, but is just going to accept it. Another interesting feature with type 8 is that they, in general, tend to mature at a young age. So they also tend to be sexually curious at a younger age than most other types, actually. Another interesting thing is that for type 8, they often use sex as some kind of tool for stress relief. And as a result, they may often objectify the sexual act or even their sexual partner, especially if they have a limited capacity for empathy. And of course, really unhealthy 8s may, as a result, turn into some kind of sadistic mode. Types 8, 9, and 1 are all body types. But this body-based orientation to sex is really the most visible with type 8. For them, it's all about the kinesthetic and physical sensation. Sex is very much focused around the genitals, so it's not as much about physical or sensual touch of other body parts. For type 8, sex is not that much about this kind of emotional or loving aspect of the relationship. They hardly ever use sex as a way of connecting in a truly intimate or vulnerable way with their partner. However, and this is the paradox of the whole thing, actually, deep down, what type 8 really craves is exactly this kind of intimate and vulnerable connection with the partner. Now, as I said, sex is very physical for type 8. But also for the self-preservation instinct, as we saw before, sex is a very physical experience. So even for the self-preservation blind 8, sex is still very much focused on the orgasm. It's still very much, let's say, performance-oriented, and this applies both to men and women. So even an 8 who is going to self-preservation blind is still going to be very much focused on the physiological release. With AIDS, there is always an expectation that there is going to be an orgasm, and AIDS just cannot understand why somebody wouldn't care about their orgasm, or they are fine with their partner having an orgasm, but they do not get one themselves. So AIDS focus very much on the orgasm, but they also care very much about the orgasm of the partner. If they're unable to sexually satisfy their partner or bring their partner to an orgasm, then this can be very difficult for them to live with. It can actually lead to major performance anxiety for the AIDS, and in the worst cases, they may even decide to quit the relationship because it's just too hard to cope with. Now, AIDS also tend to be scorekeepers, and they don't like when they are getting less than their partner, or if they have to take a more active role. And this all relates to their sense of justice. They can get easily angry if they're not getting what they believe that they are entitled to. And it's a little bit like one female sexual AIDS once said, "My name is Emma, your name is John, so E comes before J." Another very interesting observation is that AIDS tend to be quite orgasmic. You won't hear an AIDS very often complain that they have problems achieving orgasm. And of course, we should not overgeneralize, because, for example, AIDS can have problems with orgasm in sexually repressive environments, if they have a porn addiction, or if a woman is in or after her menopause. But the reason why they do not have that many problems in achieving orgasm is because they can generally quite easily surrender to bodily pleasures. They also tend to have less inhibitions. And they're also less prone to the negative societal messages around sexual repression, for example. They're also less prone to listen to all kinds of moralistic judgments that are going to create this kind of inhibitions. There is one more aspect about the orgasm of type 8 that I wanted to talk about. AIDS most often do not get an orgasm from surrendering to the sexual experience, but rather from the physical intensity, from the massive friction and pressure on the genitals. Basically, AIDS have this habit of overstimulating the senses, and this also happens in the bedroom. And of course, this also results in the fact that they somehow diminish their own ability of experiencing the more subtle expressions of sex and sexuality. Of course, we cannot generalize this because there is also some AIDS who are subjected to massive sexual repression, and they may have negative views about sex, and as a result they're not going to overstimulate the senses when it comes to sex. And of course, it's also important to say that there are some AIDS who are on the complete other spectrum. Some AIDS say that sex is the place where they can finally relax, where they finally do not need to be in a leading position. Very often AIDS are actually sick and tired of always having to be strong. So in sex they say that this is a place where I can finally be soft. This is the place where they can finally be vulnerable, where they can finally let go, where they can finally go for an emotional connection, and where they can finally open up their heart. So very important also to see that sometimes type 8 does not always want to be the pursuer and the initiator, and sometimes they just want to be seduced by their partner. Now that we have introduced type 8, let's look at some of the peculiarities and specificities of the sexual play and sexuality of this type. The first aspect relates to the strong masculinity of this type. And so there is a very strong focus on power and dominance. AIDS want sex their way, they're very action-oriented, and they like to do the pursuing, they initiate sex when they want it, and they definitely do not feel timid to voice their needs and desires. And at the same time, this sense of dominance helps them as some kind of safeguard against the fear of getting hurt emotionally. Now, in sexual play, AIDS like to come on strong, and they like to be in a position of dominance. So for example, quite often type 8 likes to perform oral sex on their partner because it gives them a sense of control and it forces the partner to surrender and submit to them. Or another thing is that it's very satisfying for a type 8 to see that the partner is getting an orgasm before they get one, because again, it gives them a feeling of dominance, and this feeling of dominance can actually be very arousing to them. And on the other side, some 8s actually do not like when their partner is not willing to be obedient or submissive to them. This can actually decrease their sexual excitement. Now, at the same time, 8s have a very strong sense of justice, and this also applies to the bedroom. They don't want to be in bed with a partner who is too submissive or too passive. They really want equality. They want their own needs to be met as well, and they like it when the partner comes up with big energy as well, but they don't want to be overpowered. So 8s can easily get turned on by the sexual power of the partner, but they're still vigilant in order not to lose control. So the sexual play of type 8 can very much be characterized as some kind of battle for dominance. For those of you who saw the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith, there's a very good sex scene which really shows how this sexual play between two 8s can be. And this scene also shows how 8s actually like to be like a bad boy or a bad girl in sexual play. Of course, it's very important to them that this battle has to be playful and innocent. If there's a real struggle for power, then the 8 will go into this defensive, and then they're going to have even bigger challenges for surrendering during sex. Another strong masculine feature is the strong self-confidence. 8s are convinced that they are good at sex, and when they meet a new partner, they may say things like, "I'm going to be your best lover ever," or "You are going to be crazy about me." Now, what type 8 often doesn't get is that sexual preferences is just a matter of taste, and that some people may like what they like, but others may not. And very often, 8s actually don't really bother to try to understand what the sexual preferences of the partner really are. So having power and being so self-confident may indeed be very positive in some cases, but in other cases it can actually diminish the sexual desire of the partner. And this is especially the case for those partners for whom sex is something more of the heart than something of the body. Now, nevertheless, this self-confidence and very strong self-esteem can have some major benefits for sexual play. Self-confidence is a very, very strong aphrodisiac, and it may actually arouse the 8 him or herself, and it may also arouse a partner. Another advantage of this self-confidence is that it allows 8s to admit their desires much more comfortably, and as a result, it's much easier for them to get an orgasm. Plus, on top of that, the high self-esteem also reduces potential problems with sexual dysfunctions, because there is a reduced likelihood for sexual anxiety. A second element is lust, which is the passion of this type. Now, lust comes up very clearly in sex. 8s know what they want and they will get it. 8s have a sense of entitlement and they must have it. If they want something, they must have it now. So they have a sense of instant gratification and it has to be their way. They also want some kind of unrestrained gratification, so very often one orgasm is not enough. Again, the quantity and quality of orgasms is very often much more important than the quality of the emotional connection for type 8. Now, for some 8s, this lust for sexual experiences may lead them to go for non-monogamy, but for other 8s, honesty and faithfulness are even more important than their lust. Lust can also manifest itself in different ways. For example, 8s can be very open and really say that size matters. So with regards to breasts and genitals, they seem to think that the bigger, the better. But lust can also manifest itself in a different way. For example, having tried everything at least once. So for example, sex toys, bondage, role play, just name it. And the 8 may have some past experience with it or a desire to at least try it out. So in sexual expression, 8s may have an overabundance of life force energy, and there may be a tendency for overdoing and excesses. They can take sex to the extreme, and some eights may go on for hours and hours without ever getting to the point of having enough. Now, they may also not be able to understand when a partner has enough because of their lack of empathy. They may also not always see when the partner is in the mood, or they may not really see which kind of preferences their partner has. After all, eights think they know what a partner wants, but very often they may be wrong about that. Now, eights actually want to have a partner who is equally lustful as they are. They may be dissatisfied when the partner has a lower libido, and they may believe that this could actually ruin the marriage. Now, female eights can also feel very uncomfortable when their libido gets lowered due to menopause. And with regards to this higher libido, there is an interesting theory. I mean, it is possible that eights have a higher level of testosterone, and testosterone is also linked with libido. So it is actually possible that eights in general have a higher libido than other types. However, we should again not overgeneralize, and we need to see other nuances as well. Some eights can actually go into the other opposite. Instead of having an active sex life, some eights actually lead a completely sexless life. For type 8, it's always a matter of all or nothing. And especially when eights get upset and they move along the 5 arrow, they may actually start withholding sex from their partner. Closely related to this lust is another aspect which is very typical for type 8. Intensity. Eights are very intense, and sex is a very good way to feel alive. Sex is passionate, plentiful, and eights use sex to show big life energy. So a lot of the eightish energetic qualities are actually pretty similar to what we discussed already about the sexual instinct. Now, eights have lots of energy, right? I mean, they may run 2 jobs, they may have a spouse and 3 kids, they may play football, and when they come home in the evening they still want to have sex, and not just once, they can go for a second round as well. So they really like to live life to the fullest, and sex is clearly part of that. So eights are active, assertive, forceful, raw, vigorous. They just go for it. They know what they want, and they really show their desire. So eights actively pursue, and some partners may actually really enjoy that. However, eights may be a little bit impatient, and they can easily overdo. And again, they may not always recognize where the line of enough is. So it is very important for the partner of type 8 to set clear boundaries, but also for the 8 to regulate their own energy in order to find a balance between their own energy and that of the partner. Because sometimes the excess of this energy may scare some of their partners. And 8s actually don't like it when the partner thinks that they are too much. Now, although there are some differences between the subtypes, this is especially true for the sexual 8, because the sexual 8 has some kind of double intensity. Now, 8s are also very demanding on their partner. They may also demand from their partner to be equally intense. Now, if the partner of the 8 is also intense, then that's a very good match. But on the contrary, if the partner is less intense or feels somehow intimidated by this intensity, then this can actually shut down the desire of the partner of the 8. And this is going to lead to the 8 being even more assertive and even more demanding, and this is just going to create a vicious circle. Now, in their lust and intensity, 8s just do not want to be stopped by anything or anybody. They don't want to be restricted by norms, they deny public opinion, and they may actually break the rules. So, as a result, sometimes 8s can come across as a little bit immoral and antisocial when it concerns sex. The final pattern that I want to talk about is about the lack or the limited vulnerability. It should be clear by now that 8s are very active in bed, and they're not going to wait for their partner to take the lead and to give them a good service. And it's not that 8s don't like to receive, But it's just that 8s have a lot of energy and it's difficult for the partner to outdo them. But there's another reason, which is maybe even more important. 8s relate with the partner on a physical level, but not on the intimate, affectionate, or vulnerable or emotional level. But actually, it's exactly this emotional and vulnerable connection that they're craving for. Now, 8s can be incredibly wild in sex, but there's often no true intimacy. And the reason is that 8s have some kind of underlying fear of powerlessness. Many 8s are not aware of it, and other 8s may actually not want to really admit it. But in reality, the lustfulness and this whole excessive approach of type 8 is basically just to mask their underlying vulnerability. The fact is that 8s find it very difficult to relax, to be vulnerable, to open themselves up, to let go, to let their guard down. And all of this because of their emotional insecurity and their fear of being taken advantage of. I mean, of course, 8s may let go after some alcohol, but that is not what real vulnerability is all about. So, for example, some female 8s may not like to have sex in the doggy style position if she did not initiate it herself, or if she doesn't really know the partner herself, because it feels as if she's losing control somehow. And this also explains why 8s do not associate sex with love. Sex is easy, love is very difficult. Sex is an activity that feels good, but love is an emotion that really needs quite some work to really feel. So sex is something raw and primal, and they're not really inclined to associate this with emotions. So as a result, very often 8s may actually like casual sex because there's no vulnerability involved. But there is a very interesting paradox here. 8s tend to perceive vulnerability as a weakness because it makes you easier to be manipulated and abused. But they seem to believe that you can only achieve truth and justice if you use power and control. However, true vulnerability is actually not a weakness. True vulnerability is a strength, and actually true vulnerability is a prerequisite for really good sex. All of this being said, it would be too simplistic to generalize and say that 8s are unable to be vulnerable or to build an emotional connection through sex at all. Don't forget that 8s do have a connection with point 2. When 8s are in love, when they feel they can finally let their guard down, when they feel that they're in charge enough already and finally they can get let go in the presence of their beloved one, 8s can show up in a completely different way. Suddenly these 8s may start slowing down, they may start cuddling and kissing, and they may actually be able to create a very, very strong emotional bond through sex. Of course, this is more easy for 8s that are not in the lower levels of development. In the lower ranges, 8s don't really care about the other, so they cannot be really intimate. But it's only when an 8 goes into the higher and healthier ranges that they can establish a true connection with another person.